the Black patients were different because they were Black. And therein lies the root of the problem.
What was happening was a colossal misunderstanding of the meaning of race.
We are undertreating our Black veterans with lung disease. It's unscientific, and it isn't based in reality, so we should stop doing it.
Wow, we can no longer ignore this. Everything you've been doing is wrong.
Since the founding of the United States, race has been used to diagnose and treat disease, as if somehow the color of someone's skin defines their biology in the way they breathe or how well their organs function. But we now know that race is a social construct. And in this series, we've reported how using race to diagnose kidney or lung disease is based on bad science. So why do we continue to practice race-based medicine? And how do we move away from a system that continues to harm patients? This is the Race Equation from the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm Rachel Gopbaum. To find out what's being done to change how we approach race in medical research and clinical practice, I'm here with two doctors who are deeply invested in this work. Dr. Michelle Morris is the Chief Medical Officer for New York City's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and Dr. Joseph Wright. He's Chief Health Equity Officer for the American Academy of Pediatrics. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Dr. Morris, tell us, when did the problem of race-based medicine first become obvious to you?
I will never forget being the only student from West Philadelphia at Penn Medical School at the time and taking care of people from my community on all the different rotations, psychiatry and internal medicine and emergency medicine. And I'll just never forget, honestly, hearing this thing that people called PPP, piss poor protoplasm, which is basically saying the reason this patient keeps getting sick or keeps coming into the ER is just because they have bad genes. Piss poor protoplasm is meant to be kind of, they got bad, bad luck, bad genes. And I heard it used over and over again, particularly for people of color. I've never heard it used for white patients. That to me was a great example of how this legacy of eugenics and racial hierarchy both are still very alive and well in the culture of medicine. That's not going to be taught in the classroom. That is taught on the wards and in the process of providing care every day.
And how did you feel when you were hearing this?
I felt, even as a little baby medical student, that this was obviously problematic, that how could you be providing objective and high quality care to everyone who shows up to your hospital if it is normalized and accepted to make comments like that? That reflects how one would interact with a patient who, quote unquote, has piss poor protoplasm. You are not going to treat that patient the same way. And so it was a profound loss of innocence for me. I came into med school extremely optimistic and green and, hopeful. And that was a real slap in the face. So fast forward to me being junior faculty at Brigham and Women's Hospital. At the time, I was asked to co-chair the Health Equity Committee for the Department of Medicine. And there was a group of students who were really going in and going deep on this question of how Black race is used in the calculation of kidney function, or EGFR. And I ended up doing a grand rounds with the students about these questions of why we use Black race in the way that we do in calculation of EGFR. And this was 2017, 2018. And I will never forget the pin drop silence at the end of that grand rounds. People were pissed. Specifically, nephrologists were very upset that we would do a grand rounds questioning something that was so fundamental, scientific. How dare you question the use of Black race in calculating kidney function. And in fact, some of the nephrologists at the time were saying, no, this is actually about health equity and racial equity. That's why the Black race variable was included, to account for quote unquote racial and ethnic diversity across the general population. And that is an unforgettable moment for me, because I literally thought tomatoes were going to be thrown at me and the students. That is how upset the faculty were after that grand rounds. And thank God now, right, like almost a decade later, to be clear, that's no longer the minority opinion.
Dr. Wright, does that resonate with you? Have you had experiences like that?
Yes, absolutely. I will say none of this shakes me to my boots, Rachel. I've been a Black man in America a long time. And this is just part and parcel of the story. So let me just move on from that. I just want to react to a couple of things that Dr. Moore shared as we talk about this with our colleagues. It's important to emphasize that it's not about intent, but outcomes, because many of the folks whose science this is, for instance, nephrologists, they get inside their feelings when it comes to their science, the ownership of their science. No one is trying to call anybody a racist, but you have to stand on the science. And when you rely on proxies based on hypothesis that is not grounded in science, this is what you get.
So there are plenty of examples of how using race in medicine is harming patients. How do we move away from these practices?
This is kind of where the rubber meets the road question is, what are we doing to address racial inequities in health and health outcomes? And I think the work around the misuse of race in clinical algorithms is, how do we change our current practices to make sure that they're not causing harm and that they're not outdated and that they're not based on 19th century definitions of race and ethnicity. And that work is incredibly important. And I think part of what works is really creating spaces where we can have the sometimes tense and difficult and challenging and uncomfortable conversations about it. And frankly, we're in a moment right now where there's a lot that we're being told we can't talk about. If we can't even talk about it, we can certainly not change it.
Dr. Wright, tell us about the initiatives that you've been working on with pediatrics.
In the American Academy of Pediatrics, we have some 300 active pieces of clinical guidance that drive the way that physicians make decisions about clinical care. This clinical guidance is rampant with bias and, if not, inequities that promote disparate care for children. And so we've undertaken a monumental task of examining all clinical guidance and identifying problems and problematic areas. And so that, in a nutshell, is what we have been doing and are continuing to do. What I think is important for your listeners to understand is that when we talk about race-based medicine, it really is a broad span of conditions and approaches to decision-making that have been present for hundreds of years.
Give me an example of a clinical guidance in pediatrics that used race.
In 2011, the American Academy of Pediatrics published a clinical practice guideline on the approach to urinary tract infection in young children. In 2019, one of our members raised their hand and said, there's a problem here. One of the steps in this algorithm stratifies approach based on race. In fact, it says right here, you look at it. For little Black girls, we do not have to offer a catheterized urine specimen because it's less likely that this child will have a urinary tract infection. In other words, these kids are less likely to have a urinary tract infection than those kids. So let's design our clinical pathway that literally dichotomizes the approach to their treatment. Race was being conflated with biologic variables to determine the course of treatment. And that is wrong. And if we miss urinary tract infection in young children, there is the possibility or the probability that they will have scarred urinary tracts as they grow, and this can be problematic in later life. And I will share that the colleagues who developed the urinary tract infection clinical practice guideline are friends of mine. I know that they didn't wake up one day to discriminate against little Black girls. I know this, but the fact that the disparities in treatment could result in differential outcomes for little Black girls is unacceptable. That's what drives what we're talking about here today.
So, Dr. Morse, you've been instrumental in creating change in New York City through the Coalition to End Racism in Clinical Algorithms, also known as CIRCA, which launched in 2021. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we are thankful that we've been able to get health systems across the whole city to engage in this coalition. Coalition work, I think, is incredibly effective for complex problems like this one, where you really do need the healthcare delivery system leadership. You need your lab director, you need your department chairs, you need your electronic medical record system, you need your trainees, you need your faculty. It literally touches every part of the system. And this needed to be accelerated, right? Like, we didn't want to just wait for 10 years for the research to change practice. And that's what this coalition was really about. And we had 12 institutions that were part of it. And the majority of those institutions are safety net institutions that care for more people of color, because we have a very segregated healthcare system, racially segregated healthcare system in New York City. And since we launched the coalition, we were able to get 9 of 12 institutions to de-implement algorithms in which race was misused. That included kidney function, lung function, vaginal birth after cesarean section. We recently added hypertension guidelines. And then we've also gotten into the kidney transplant space as well. That coalition has been very, very effective. And we're excited that we feel like we've pushed as far as we can in New York City. And now CIRCA is actually going to be expanding statewide, which is extremely exciting. And part of the work that's undone, in my opinion, is the payment reform. Payment policy should align with de-implementing algorithms that misuse race. It is one of the most powerful incentives that healthcare delivery organizations have.
So, what's the most important change you've seen with this work?
I'll just say, in our work in New York City, the part that worked the most was creating a dialogue without judgment. People needed to be able to have a space where they could ask the question about, well, I actually thought race and ethnicity was this, and maybe it's not. That work is essential. In academia, where knowledge production is theoretically the whole point, that dialogue is so critical. That dialogue is what created massive action. A lot of that action was driven by students, residents, junior faculty. And I think at the same time, even though we have been successful in moving the needle on correcting how race has been misused in algorithms, and that work is important, it's real, it's pragmatic, it's impacting literally hundreds of thousands of patients, if not millions of patients every day across the country. And yet that work of redistributing resources to really address and upend racial inequities in health outcomes is not being done. And in fact, we're going backwards on that, because in addition to this work on clinical algorithms, let's be honest, this is not the whole apple. And if we are still going to send our patients right back to a segregated healthcare system where we're calculating their kidney function correctly, irrespective of their race, but they can't get access to the basic medications that they need to control their high blood pressure, we have failed. Or because they're undocumented, they don't have access to health insurance and therefore can't get their mammogram, we've also failed. If we don't have universal health care and make that a part of our constitution and rights in this country, we've still failed. And this work matters. It's one drop in a big bucket of racial health inequities that our country has never been able to reckon with fully or fix.
So I'd like to talk about how your work has been successful on the ground. How has CIRCA helped patients?
Right after the new guidance for calculating wait time for kidney transplant became policy for the nation, one of the institutions in Circa did a proactive project essentially to identify Black patients, recalculate their wait time, and then see what the impacts were. And they showed that they had a handful of Black patients that got several years back of their wait time and that got their kidney transplants. And a lot of the critique that we got and pushback that we got was this is going to be unfair to white people. And I want to address that directly because I do think we often worry that there is a zero-sum game here, that if Black people have more access to healthcare or kidney transplant, that automatically it means white people or other groups have less access. And not only is that not true in reality, it's also not true based on the data. What we found was that in these first 2 years of implementing this new policy on kidney transplant wait time that no longer systematically disadvantages Black people, that the change led to an increase in Black people getting kidney transplantation. And it did not decrease access or change the rate of transplant for non-Black people. And that to me is so important. I mean, it really is clear that we all win in this scenario.
So if we know that race-based medicine, like the old kidney algorithm, is based on faulty science, how should we approach race? Dr. Wright, you've talked about being race conscious. What does that mean?
Everything I've talked about with you today here, Rachel, has been in retrospect. We found problems and we're fixing the problems. What ultimately we need to do is right from jump, right from the development, the conceptualization of practice guidance, ensure, number one, that the right people are in the room. Number two, that having a much more collaborative approach where we have social scientists, we have economists, we have people who understand those social driver factors that are so often at the root of inequities in lived experience, that they're at the table when we develop guidance, which is currently not the case, by the way. This is a bit aspirational at the moment, but is a place where we are directing our colleagues across the landscape of professional societies to do so.
And what does that look like in training and in guidance? Because you're saying we need a different approach here, correct?
We do. With regard to training, medical students are the group to be invested in, and they are the ones who are challenging dogma and challenging the status quo. And they need to be empowered when they have questions. And I would contend that we need to focus our educational efforts on the generation that is going to be about the change as they move into positions of authority and power within the medical education structure. That's where the focus has to be.
So we need action on racial health inequities, not more studies. We need implementation. We need redistribution of resources. And I want to highlight also, again, that the work in the clinical algorithm space is still not complete. And we have to get rid of this kind of gag order that many of our institutions are succumbing to in a time when there is risk, unfortunately, about talking about these kinds of issues, particularly racial inequities, openly and honestly. That has to change.
So how are you both working in this current climate of anti-DEI policies?
The current climate is extremely toxic and challenging, unfortunately. Even though it's challenging, we have to find ways to protect our ability to not only talk about these issues and problem solve for them, but document that we're doing that. Documenting our work is so critical. It's how we learn. It's how we advance the science. It's how we collaborate. It's how we do the day-to-day of our job as physicians who are serving our communities. And that is risky in a way that it shouldn't be right now in our country. I think that the way we move through this, we can't move past it. We have to move through it by doing it together. It's by acknowledging that there's no way to appease some of the demands that are coming from the federal government, and that ultimately the way that we are going to be able to succeed in addressing racial health inequities is by doing so in collaboration with each other across institutions, because that's how we build power to overcome this moment.
Yes, it's partnerships. It's not a coincidence that the Doris Duke Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation have supported both the work that Dr. Morse described as well as the work that I'm describing. We have to think more broadly about partnerships, particularly with the threats to federal funding. We have to take advantage, quite frankly, of rage philanthropy in this environment, meaning that folks who are angry about what they're seeing in the current climate and want to partner with organizations to do something. And then we also have to think creatively about where and how we position equity science in the context of health system environments. And I would suggest that for those physicians who are committed to this work, that they become involved at the level of health systems and hospital leadership to conduct this work. Because unless it's embedded in the practitioners and the healthcare systems that touch our patients, it's not going to happen.
So, how do you fix it?
Simply put, it is ensuring that we teach the history of race relations in this country, number one, at the level of medical education. This is typically not happening. Secondly, that we tie it to the inequities that drive patient outcomes and tying those dots together as part of standard work of medical education and not optional.
So, it's really talking about the history so we make sure that we understand how we got here.
This is very important. We're having conversations, Rachel, that we haven't had in 400 years, and we can't lose that momentum. These are just baby steps. These are incremental efforts that are going to require generational transformation. Until we activate the current generation of learners to be the ones who are developing curriculum, who are making sure that the regulatory bodies like the Liaison Council on Medical Education and the Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education, which both recently whacked out any requirements to teach on health equity, until we have leaders who will stand up and ensure that as part of health professions education, everything we've talked about is there and part of standard learning, who will be accountable and make sure that happens. It's going to be a minute before we see the kind of change that's necessary.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Next time on The Race Equation, what happens when race is no longer allowed to be considered in research, training, or patient care because of a federal mandate?
How do you study disparities in maternal outcomes if you don't look at race, if you can't say Black?
Scientifically, I have never understood the idea of devaluing equity work or disparities work because it is such a rich vault of knowledge that helps everyone.
The Race Equation is a special series from the New England Journal of Medicine. It's reported by me, Rachel Gottbaum. Our senior producer is Catherine Fenolosa. Our editor is Sarah Kate Kramer. Sound design by James Trout. Andrea Lopez Cruzado is our fact checker. We had help from Dr. Aaron Baugh, Dr. Winfred Williams, Christine Gwynn, Adam Strauss, and Leocadia Marchwinski. Funding for this series is provided by the Doris Duke Foundation, committed to building a creative, equitable, and sustainable future.